I was standing in my grandmother's old kitchen when I saw construction equipment rolling onto the corner lot she'd fought so hard to keep, and my blood ran cold because I knew she'd never sold that land to anyone, especially not to the Pinecrest Meadows HOA. My name is James Anderson, and I just inherited my grandmother Dorothy's property in Gilbert, Arizona, a quiet suburb southeast of Phoenix. She'd passed away 3 months ago at 92, sharp as a tack until the very end. The house itself was modest, a Spanish-style ranch built in 1967 when this area was still mostly farmland. But it was the extra lot, a triangular piece of land about a quarter-acre in size, that had always been the source of tension between Gran and the homeowners association that had sprouted up around her property in the early 2000s. I'd driven in from Tucson, where I worked as a civil engineer, planning to spend a few weeks sorting through Gran's belongings and deciding what to do with the property. The house needed work, sure, but it had good bones. More importantly, it held every memory of summers I'd spent here as a kid, learning to fish in the canal behind the property, helping Gran tend her garden, listening to her stories about the old days. That first morning, I was making coffee in her ancient percolator when I heard the rumble of heavy machinery. I looked out the window and felt my stomach drop. A backhoe was parked on the corner lot, and 2 men in hard hats were walking the perimeter with measuring equipment. Behind them, a silver sedan pulled up, and out stepped a woman in her late 40s with blonde highlights, oversized sunglasses, and an expression that screamed she owned the place. I set down my coffee mug and headed outside, my work boots crunching on the gravel driveway. The Arizona sun was already fierce at 8 in the morning, promising another scorcher of a day. As I approached the lot, the blonde woman spotted me, and her mouth tightened into a thin line. "Can I help you?" she called out, her tone making it clear she thought I was the one who needed to leave. "That's my question," I said, stopping at the property line. "This is private property, my grandmother's property." The woman pulled off her sunglasses, revealing sharp blue eyes. "I'm Barbara Winters, president of the Pinecrest Meadows Homeowners Association, and you're mistaken. This lot was sold to the HOA 2 years ago. We're breaking ground on a community playground." "Like hell it was," I said, feeling heat rise in my chest that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. "My grandmother would never sell this land. She told me 100 times that the HOA was trying to take it, but she refused every offer." Barbara's smile was patronizing. "I understand you're emotional right now, dealing with your grandmother's passing, but I assure you, we have all the proper documentation. The sale went through in March of 2024. We paid fair market value. Show me the paperwork then." She sighed like I was a particularly slow child. "It's all on file at the county recorder's office. We don't need to show you anything. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do." One of the construction workers started the backhoe's engine, and the sound was like a physical assault. I stood there, fists clenched, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to physically block them from digging, but that would probably land me in jail. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started recording. "I'm putting you on notice," I said loudly, making sure my phone captured Barbara's face. "I have not authorized any construction on this property. If you proceed, you're trespassing and destroying private property. I will pursue legal action." Barbara rolled her eyes. "Do what you need to do. We'll be here every day this week." She turned to the workers. "Proceed as planned." I stood there filming as the backhoe's bucket bit into the red Arizona soil, gouging out chunks of earth that my grandmother had walked across for decades. Each scoop felt like a violation, but I forced myself to document everything. When I had 20 minutes of footage, I walked back to the house, my mind racing. The first call I made was to my Uncle Richard, grandson and my mother's brother. He lived in Scottsdale and had helped Gran with her affairs over the years. "James, how's the house?" His voice was cheerful, unsuspecting. "Uncle Richard, did Gran sell the corner lot to the HOA?" There was a pause. "What? No, absolutely not. She fought them tooth and nail on that." "Why?" I told him what was happening. I could hear him moving around, probably grabbing his keys. "Don't let them dig," he said. "I'm coming over, and call a lawyer. Call Tom Patterson. He handled some property disputes for your grandmother. He'll know what to do." Tom Patterson's office was in downtown Gilbert, and when I called, his secretary said he could see me that afternoon. In the meantime, I drove to the Maricopa County Recorder's office in Phoenix, my truck's air conditioning barely keeping up with the midday heat. The recorder's office was busy, full of title companies and lawyers' assistants pulling documents. I waited in line for 30 minutes before reaching a clerk, a tired-looking woman named Susan according to her name tag. "I need to see any recorded sales or transfers for this address in the past 3 years," I said, sliding a paper with the property information across the counter. She typed into her computer, waited, then frowned. "There's a deed recorded in March 2024. Sale from Dorothy Anderson to Pinecrest Meadows HOA. $45,000. My heart sank. "Can I see the actual document?" She printed it out, and I stared at the pages with growing horror and confusion. There it was, apparently in black and white. A grant deed showing my grandmother's name as the grantor and the HOA as the grantee. The signature at the bottom looked like Gran's shaky handwriting. The notary seal appeared official, and everything seemed legitimate, except it couldn't be. "Can I get copies of everything?" I asked. Susan nodded and started printing. As I waited, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my texts with Gran. We'd messaged regularly, especially in her last year. I found what I was looking for from April 2024, just a month after this alleged sale supposedly happened. "Those vultures from the HOA came by again today," Gran had written. "Offered me $50,000 for the corner lot. I told Barbara Winters where she could stick her offer. That land will be yours someday, James. Don't ever let them take it." I screenshotted the message and forwarded it to my uncle. This wasn't just a mistake. This was fraud. Tom Patterson's office was in a renovated bungalow near Heritage Square. He was a man in his 60s with silver hair and the careful, measured way of speaking that came from decades of courtroom work. I spread the documents across his desk, showed him the text messages, and explained the situation. He studied everything for a long time, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. Finally, he looked up. "This stinks to high heaven," he said. "Dorothy was my client for 15 years. I helped her draft 3 different rejection letters to the HOA. The last one was in January of 2024, just 2 months before this supposed sale. She was adamant about never selling." "So what do we do?" I asked. "First, we get a forensic document examiner to look at that signature. Second, we file for an immediate restraining order to stop all construction. Third, we notify the police because if this is forged, it's fraud and possibly identity theft." He leaned back in his chair. "This is serious, James. Someone committed a felony if they forged your grandmother's signature and notarized a fake deed. How long will all this take? The restraining order we can file for tomorrow morning, but getting it granted might take a few days, depending on the judge's schedule. In the meantime, that HOA can keep digging." I felt helpless. "There's got to be something I can do." Tom thought for a moment. "You could try the direct approach. Confront the HOA board with what you know. Sometimes, if you rattle the cage hard enough, the guilty parties get nervous and make mistakes. But be careful. If they're willing to forge documents, they're not going to go down easy. That evening, I sat in Gran's living room and went through her file cabinet. She'd kept meticulous records, every letter, every rejection, every interaction with the HOA documented and filed. I found the 3 letters Tom had mentioned, each one formally declining to sell the property. I found notes from HOA meetings where they'd discussed trying to acquire the lot for a playground and community space. And buried in a folder marked important, I found something else. It was a letter from Gran to me, dated just a month before she died. My hands shook as I read it. My dear James, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope I'm somewhere better. I need you to know that the HOA has been getting more aggressive about that corner lot. Barbara Winters came by last week with a contract and got nasty when I refused to even look at it. She said things would be easier if I just cooperated. I don't trust her, James. I don't trust any of them. Please, don't let them take this land. It's been in our family since before Gilbert was anything more than a hay shipping point. Your great-grandfather bought it for almost nothing, and it's worth something now, but that's not the point. The point is it's ours, and some people need to learn they can't just take what they want. I love you, sweetheart. Be strong. I read it 3 times, Gran's voice echoing in my head. She'd known something was wrong. She'd seen it coming. The next morning, I was back at the lot at 7. The construction crew arrived at 7:30, Barbara Winters pulling up right behind them in her silver sedan. This time, I was prepared. I had my phone recording again, the documents from the recorder's office in a folder, and Tom Patterson's business card in my pocket. Miss Winters, I called out as she got out of her car. We need to talk. She sighed dramatically. I don't have time for this. We already discussed everything yesterday. Did my grandmother ever meet with you in person about the sale of this property in March 2024? Something flickered in her eyes. That's not your concern. It absolutely is my concern. She was 92 years old. If she signed any documents, I want to know the circumstances. Barbara crossed her arms. The sale was handled properly. Your grandmother was of sound mind. She was advised to seek legal counsel, and she chose to accept our offer. End of story. Really. Because I have text messages from her a month after this supposed sale where she's bragging about turning down your offers. I have letters drafted by her attorney rejecting your proposals. And I have a letter she wrote before she died saying she didn't trust you. Barbara's face went pale, then flushed red. You're making wild accusations. Am I? Then you won't mind if I get a forensic expert to examine the signature on that deed. You won't mind if I notify the police about potential fraud. One of the construction workers, a younger guy with a weathered face, had stopped what he was doing and was listening. Barbara noticed, and her voice dropped to a harsh whisper. You're playing with fire. This HOA has resources and lawyers. You're one person trying to hold up community improvement. This isn't about community improvement. This is about you taking property that doesn't belong to you. We paid for it. No, I said firmly. You forged documents to make it look like you paid for it. There's a difference. Barbara's hand shook slightly as she pointed at me. You have no proof of that. You're just a bitter relative who's upset about not getting an inheritance. We'll see what the police and the courts say about that. She turned on her heel and got back in her car, slamming the door hard enough that I heard it crack. She drove off without another word, leaving the construction crew standing around awkwardly. The younger worker who'd been listening approached me. Hey man, I don't know what's going on, but this job has been weird from the start. We were told everything was cleared and permitted, but when we pulled the permits, they were dated last week. For a sale that supposedly happened 2 years ago. What's your name? I asked. Miguel Santos. I work for Desert Landscaping and Construction. We were subcontracted by the HOA. Miguel, I'm going to be honest with you. I think the HOA forged my grandmother's signature to steal this land. I'm taking legal action. If you keep working on this lot, you might get caught up in a criminal investigation. He nodded slowly. I'll talk to my boss. We don't want any part of fraud. He pulled out his phone. Let me take some pictures of your documents if that's okay, just to cover ourselves. I let him photograph everything. 10 minutes later, his boss called him, and the crew packed up their equipment and left. Small victory, but I'd take it. Tom Patterson filed for a temporary restraining order that afternoon. The hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. In the meantime, I kept digging through Gran's records and started talking to her old neighbors. Mrs. Chen, who lived 2 houses down, was in her 70s and had known Gran for 30 years. I found her watering her roses in the early evening when the heat finally broke. "James, I heard you were back," she said, giving me a hug. "I'm so sorry about Dorothy. She was a wonderful woman." Mrs. Chen, did my grandmother ever mention selling the corner lot to the HOA? Her face darkened. Never. In fact, about 6 months before she passed, she told me Barbara Winters had tried to trick her into signing papers. Said Barbara showed up with some survey documents and asked her to sign, claiming it was just about property line verification. Your grandmother was sharp, though. She read every word and realized they were actually transfer documents. She threw Barbara out of her house. Did she report it? She told me she called the HOA management company and complained, but nothing came of it. Those people protect each other. Mrs. Chen set down her hose. I'll testify to that if you need me to. What Dorothy told me, I mean. That might help, thank you. Over the next 2 days, I talked to 5 more neighbors. All of them confirmed the same story. Gran had refused to sell. The HOA had gotten increasingly aggressive, and Barbara Winters had been the primary antagonist. One neighbor, an older gentleman named Frank Delgado, had even witnessed one of the confrontations. Barbara told your grandmother that if she didn't sell, the HOA would make her life difficult, Frank said. She mentioned something about code violations and liens. It was a threat, plain and simple. I almost called the police that day. Why didn't you? He looked ashamed. Because I'm part of the HOA too, I didn't want to cause trouble. But after Dorothy died and then this playground thing started, I felt sick about it. I should have said something sooner. You're saying something now. That's what matters. The restraining order hearing was held in Maricopa County Superior Court. Tom Patterson presented our evidence, the text messages, the rejection letters, the neighbor testimonies, and the suspicious timeline. The HOA's lawyer, a slick guy in an expensive suit named Derek Hoffman, argued that we had no proof of fraud, just circumstantial evidence and hearsay. Judge Maria Gonzalez was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who clearly didn't appreciate having her time wasted. She reviewed all the documents carefully, then looked at Derek Hoffman. Counselor, your client has a recorded deed showing a sale in March 2024. Yet I'm looking at text messages from April 2024 where the alleged seller brags about refusing to sell. I'm looking at multiple witness statements saying Miss Anderson never intended to sell. Explain that to me. Hoffman cleared his throat. Your Honor, elderly people can be forgetful or confused. It's possible Mrs. Anderson completed the sale and then forgot about it. My grandmother wasn't confused, I said, unable to stop myself. She was. Tom put a hand on my arm to quiet me, but Judge Gonzalez looked at me with interest. Mr. Anderson, did your grandmother show any signs of dementia or memory issues before she passed? No, Your Honor. She was healthy and sharp. She did her own finances, drove herself to appointments, played bridge twice a week. Her doctor can confirm that. Judge Gonzalez made a note. Mr. Hoffman, I'm granting the temporary restraining order. All construction on the disputed property is to cease immediately pending further investigation. Additionally, I'm ordering your client to produce all original documents related to the sale, including any contracts, correspondence, and the notary's records. This court takes allegations of fraud very seriously. She banged her gavel. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. As we left the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Tom clapped me on the back. Good first step. Now the real work begins. That evening, my Uncle Richard came over with Chinese takeout, and we sat at Gran's old kitchen table planning our next moves. I called the police department like Tom suggested, Richard said. Filed a fraud report. They're assigning a detective to investigate. How long will that take? No idea. But with the judge's order, at least they can't keep building. He opened a container of orange chicken. I also started going through Gran's bank records. No deposit of $45,000 ever showed up. If she sold that land, where's the money? That was an excellent question. According to the deed, the sale price was $45,000, but Gran's bank accounts, which were now in probate, showed no such deposit. I pulled up her statements on my laptop. Look at this, I said, pointing to March 2024. Her typical monthly deposits were her Social Security and a small pension. Nothing unusual, no large deposits at all. Richard leaned over to look. Check the months after too. I scrolled through April, May, June, all the way to September when she died. Nothing. No $45,000, no suspicious transfers, nothing. They never paid her, I said slowly. Even if the signature was real, which it's not, they never actually paid her. That's another nail in their coffin, Richard said. Tom needs to see this. I emailed the bank statements to Tom that night. His reply came within an hour. Excellent. This proves lack of consideration, which would invalidate the deed even if the signature was genuine. Great work. 2 days later, Detective Lisa Warren from the Gilbert Police Department called me. She was a woman in her 30s with a direct, professional manner. Mr. Anderson, I've reviewed the fraud report and the court documents. I'd like to come by and talk to you about your grandmother's case. She arrived that afternoon with a partner, Detective Mike Houston, a stocky man with graying temples. We sat in Gran's living room, and I walked them through everything. The timeline, the documents, the neighbor's statements, the missing money. Detective Warren took detailed notes. Have you had any contact with Barbara Winters since the hearing? She called me once. Said I was making a big mistake and that the HOA would sue me for defamation. Did you record that call? No, I didn't think to. If she contacts you again, record it. Arizona is a one-party consent state, so it's legal as long as you're part of the conversation. She flipped through her notepad. We're going to need to interview Miss Winters and the notary who supposedly witnessed your grandmother's signature. Do you have the notary's information? I pulled up the deed on my laptop. The notary seal belonged to someone named Patricia Holloway, with a commission number and expiration date clearly visible. Detective Houston wrote it down. We'll track her down. If she notarized a document without actually witnessing the signature, that's a crime in itself. What happens if you find evidence of fraud? I asked. Depends on what we find. But forgery and fraud of this nature are felonies in Arizona. If Miss Winters or anyone else in the HOA knowingly participated, they could be looking at prison time. After the detectives left, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and dread. This was really happening. What had started as a property dispute was turning into a criminal investigation. The next week was tense. The construction equipment remained on the lot, idle but present, like a reminder of the battle ahead. I spent my days organizing Gran's house, boxing up her belongings and working remotely when I could focus. My employer in Tucson was understanding, giving me flexibility during this time. I also started attending HOA meetings. Pinecrest Meadows held them monthly at the community clubhouse, and as a property owner within the development, I had the right to attend. The next meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. The clubhouse was a modest building near the entrance to the neighborhood, with a small pool and some exercise equipment. When I walked in at 7, about 20 people were already seated in folding chairs. Barbara Winters stood at the front with a few other board members, including the vice president, a stern-looking man named Howard Fletcher, and the treasurer, a woman named Carol Simmons. Barbara's eyes narrowed when she saw me, but she couldn't kick me out. I took a seat in the back and waited. The meeting started with typical HOA business: landscaping bids, pool maintenance, someone's complaint about a neighbor's RV. Then Barbara got to what she called new business. As many of you know, we've been working on the community playground project for the corner lot on Saguaro Drive. Unfortunately, we've hit a snag due to a frivolous lawsuit from a non-member. She didn't look at me, but everyone knew who she meant. This individual is trying to block a community amenity that will benefit all our children. An older woman in the front raised her hand. Isn't it true that the property owner never actually sold the land? Barbara's smile was tight. That's not accurate. We have a recorded deed. But the judge issued a restraining order, someone else said. A temporary restraining order, which we're confident will be lifted once the matter is properly reviewed. Barbara shuffled her papers. The important thing is that we don't let outside agitators prevent us from improving our community. I stood up. I'd like to say something. The room went quiet. Barbara's jaw clenched. This is a members-only meeting. Actually, I am a member. I inherited property within the HOA boundaries. That makes me a member and gives me the right to speak. Howard Fletcher leaned over and whispered something to Barbara. She nodded reluctantly. Fine. You have 2 minutes. I walked to the front, acutely aware of everyone's eyes on me. My name is James Anderson. My grandmother, Dorothy Anderson, owned the property at the corner of Saguaro Drive and Mesa Road. She never sold that land to this HOA. The deed that Barbara Winters is referencing appears to be fraudulent. The signature doesn't match, the money was never paid, and my grandmother was telling people she refused to sell even after the supposed sale date. Murmurs rippled through the room. Barbara started to interrupt, but I kept going. The police are now investigating this as a fraud case. If any of you were told that this land was legally acquired, you were lied to. If any HOA funds were spent on this project based on a fraudulent deed, that's embezzlement. I'm not trying to block community improvement. I'm trying to stop what appears to be a crime. Barbara shot to her feet. These are outrageous accusations. You have no proof. I have bank statements showing the $45,000 you supposedly paid was never deposited. I have witnesses who will testify my grandmother refused every offer. I have text messages sent after the alleged sale where she's still refusing. And I have a judge who found enough evidence of fraud to issue a restraining order. I looked around the room. If I were you all, I'd be asking some serious questions about where your HOA dues are going and who's making decisions in your name. The room erupted. People were shouting questions at Barbara, at me, at each other. Howard Fletcher tried to call for order, but it was chaos. Finally, Barbara grabbed the microphone. "Meeting adjourned," she shouted, then stormed out a side door. Several residents approached me afterward. A woman named Jennifer Martinez, who had 2 young kids, looked worried. Is this really fraud? We were told this was all legitimate. That's what the evidence suggests. I'm not blaming the community. I think most of you had no idea. A man named David Park crossed his arms. If Barbara used our dues to pay for this playground without actually owning the land, can we get that money back? That's a question for your HOA lawyer. But if I were you, I'd request a full financial audit. The seed was planted. Over the next few days, I heard from Richard that several HOA members had filed formal complaints demanding transparency and an emergency board meeting. Barbara was losing control of her fiefdom. Meanwhile, Detective Warren called with an update. We interviewed the notary, Patricia Holloway. She claims she doesn't remember notarizing any document for Dorothy Anderson. When we showed her the deed, she said the signature looks like hers, but she has no record of it in her log book, which notaries are required to keep. So either she's lying or someone forged her signature too. Exactly. We're pursuing both angles. We've also requested handwriting samples from Barbara Winters and other HOA board members for comparison to the forged signature. Can they refuse? They can, but it looks suspicious, and we can always get a warrant if we develop probable cause. The dominoes were starting to fall. Tom Patterson filed a motion to void the fraudulent deed and restore clear title to the property in my name as Grand's heir. The HOA's lawyer, Derek Hoffman, filed a response claiming the deed was valid and that I was harassing his clients. The second hearing was scheduled for early June, 3 weeks after the initial restraining order. In that time, I'd become something of a local celebrity. The story had been picked up by the Arizona Republic and the Gilbert Sun News. HOA fraud investigation rocks quiet suburb, read one headline. Another said grandmother's property stolen after death, family claims. The attention made Barbara Winters even more hostile. She sent me a cease and desist letter through her lawyer, demanding I stop making defamatory statements about her. Tom Patterson laughed when he saw it. This is a slap-suit threat, strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's designed to intimidate you into silence. Ignore it. You have evidence supporting your claims, which means it's not defamation, it's reporting facts. The day before the hearing, Detective Warren called again. Mr. Anderson, we've made an arrest. My heart started pounding. Who? Patricia Holloway, the notary. She broke down during questioning and admitted that Barbara Winters paid her $5,000 to backdate a notarization. Miss Holloway claims she notarized a blank form that Miss Winters said was for an estate planning document, but she never actually witnessed Dorothy Anderson sign anything. She's been charged with fraud and notary misconduct. What about Barbara Winters? We're obtaining a warrant for her arrest now. We have Miss Holloway's testimony, bank records showing the $5,000 payment, and text messages between them discussing the scheme. We're also investigating Howard Fletcher and Carol Simmons, the other board members, to determine their level of involvement. I sat down heavily on Grand's old couch. This is really happening. It is. Justice takes time, but it does happen. We'll need you to testify when this goes to trial, assuming it doesn't end in a plea deal. That evening, I called my mother in Colorado to tell her the news. She'd been following the case from afar, too ill with lupus to travel but deeply invested in the outcome. Your grandmother would be so proud of you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. She always said you had a spine of steel. I learned from her. What are you going to do with the property once this is all settled? I'd been thinking about that. I don't know yet. Maybe build something she would have liked, maybe just keep it as open space, but it'll be my choice, not the HOA's. The hearing the next day was packed. Word had spread, and the courtroom was full of HOA members, neighbors, reporters, and curious onlookers. Barbara Winters arrived with Derek Hoffman, her face pale but defiant. She didn't look at me. Tom Patterson had prepared extensively. He presented the evidence methodically. The bank records showing no payment, the text messages proving Grand's intent to never sell, the neighbors' testimonies, and now the bombshell of Patricia Holloway's confession and arrest. Derek Hoffman tried to argue that Holloway was lying to save herself, that there was no direct proof Barbara Winters had forged anything. But his arguments were weak, and Judge Gonzalez wasn't buying it. "Mr. Hoffman, I have a notary who has confessed to participating in fraud at your client's behest. I have bank records showing payment from your client to said notary. I have a complete absence of the sale proceeds that should have been paid to the decedent. And I have clear evidence that Dorothy Anderson had no intention of selling this property." She looked at Barbara Winters with cold eyes. "Miss Winters, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Barbara stood up, shaking. "Your Honor, I believed I was acting in the best interests of the community. The property was going to waste, and we needed the space for. That's not an answer to my question. Did you or did you not forge Dorothy Anderson's signature on the deed in question?" Barbara looked at her lawyer. Hoffman leaned in and whispered to her. "Finally," she said, "I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination." The courtroom buzzed. Judge Gonzalez banged her gavel. "That's your right. However, based on the evidence presented, I am voiding the deed dated March 2024 as fraudulent. Title to the property is restored to the estate of Dorothy Anderson, and by extension, to James Anderson as her heir. The temporary restraining order is made permanent. The Pinecrest Meadows HOA is ordered to remove all equipment and materials from the property within 72 hours and to pay Mr. Anderson's legal fees." She paused. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the Arizona Attorney General's office for further investigation into the HOA's financial practices. This hearing is adjourned." The gavel came down like a thunderclap. I felt Tom's hand on my shoulder, steady and reassuring. Around us, people were talking all at once. Some HOA members looked shocked, others angry. A few were clearly pleased, probably those who'd never liked Barbara's dictatorial management style. As we filed out of the courtroom, Barbara Winters was intercepted by Detective Warren and Detective Houston. I watched as Warren said something to her, saw Barbara's face crumble, and then Warren put handcuffs on her wrists. She was being arrested right there in front of everyone. "Barbara Winters, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and theft by deception," Warren said clearly. "You have the right to remain silent." The Miranda warning echoed in the courthouse hallway. Cameras flashed as reporters captured the moment. Derek Hoffman was frantically talking into his phone, probably calling for a criminal defense attorney. Tom guided me outside into the bright June sunshine. "That's as good an outcome as we could have hoped for," he said. "What happens now? Criminally, she'll be arraigned, probably post-bail unless the prosecutor argues she's a flight risk. Then there'll be a preliminary hearing and eventually a trial unless she pleads out. Civil-wise, you own the property free and clear. You can do with it as you please. What about the HOA? They're in for a rough time. The Attorney General's investigation will probably uncover other financial irregularities. There might be more charges. At minimum, they'll need to elect a new board and rebuild their reputation." Over the next few weeks, the story continued to unfold. Howard Fletcher and Carol Simmons, the other board members, claimed they'd known nothing about the fraudulent deed. An independent audit of the HOA's finances revealed that Barbara had spent over $60,000 on the playground project, all approved through questionable board votes, where she'd controlled the agenda and rushed through approvals. The audit also found smaller irregularities. inflated landscaping contracts with companies owned by Barbara's brother-in-law, unauthorized bonuses paid to herself as management fees, and missing documentation for various expenses. While not all of it was criminal, it painted a picture of an organization that had been run as Barbara's personal kingdom. The HOA members voted to dissolve the existing board and hold emergency elections. A new president, a retired accountant named Ruth Palmer, took over with a mandate to restore transparency and fiscal responsibility. One of her first actions was to formally apologize to me on behalf of the community. "We're horrified by what happened to your grandmother," she said when she called me. "This doesn't represent the values of our neighborhood. If there's anything we can do to make amends, please let us know." "I appreciate that," I said. I never blamed the community, just Barbara and whoever helped her. "We'd still like to discuss the possibility of purchasing that corner lot legitimately if you're ever interested in selling. For a fair price with complete transparency, but no pressure whatsoever. It's your property." Let me think about it. In July, Barbara Winters pleaded guilty to fraud, forgery, and embezzlement in exchange for a reduced sentence. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison, ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and to me, and banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona for life. Patricia Holloway received 2 years of probation and lost her notary license. The day the sentencing came down, I was at Gran's house, now legally mine, painting the living room. My Uncle Richard had helped me repair the roof, and I decided to keep the property rather than sell it. I was planning to move from Tucson to Gilbert, use the house as my primary residence, and turn the corner lot into a community garden in Gran's memory. Not a playground controlled by an HOA, but an open space where neighbors could plant vegetables, flowers, and maybe a few fruit trees. I'd put up a sign dedicating it to Dorothy Anderson, a woman who'd stood her ground and taught her grandson to do the same. Mrs. Chen from down the street was the first to ask for a plot in the garden. Then Frank Delgado, who testified about Barbara's threats. Then Jennifer Martinez with her 2 kids. Within a week, I had 15 families signed up, all eager to participate. "Your grandmother would have loved this," Mrs. Chen said as we laid out the garden plots in August. "She always said good soil and honest work were the best things in life." The first plants went into the ground in September, a year after Gran had passed. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, herbs, and flowers. I planted a rosemary bush in the center, Gran's favorite, and a small plaque that read, "Dorothy's Garden," in memory of a woman who knew the difference between right and wrong. Ruth Palmer, the new HOA president, stopped by one day while I was watering. "This is beautiful," she said, looking around at the emerging garden. "You know, if you ever want to donate it to the community officially, we'd maintain it and make sure it stays true to your vision." "Maybe someday," I said. "For now, I'm keeping it private, but everyone's welcome to enjoy it," she nodded. "That's fair. We've got a lot of trust to rebuild." Over the following months, life settled into a new normal. I transferred to my company's Phoenix office, making my commute much shorter. I renovated Gran's house room by room, keeping the character she'd loved while updating the systems that needed it. The garden flourished, becoming a gathering place for neighbors who'd never really talked before. Detective Warren closed the case officially in October, her final report documenting every detail of the fraud scheme. The Attorney General's office pursued additional charges related to the HOA's financial mismanagement, ultimately recovering most of the misappropriated funds and returning them to the community. Barbara Winters began serving her sentence at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. I didn't feel triumph or satisfaction about that, just a weary sense of justice being done. She'd made choices, bad ones, and now she was paying the price. One evening in November, as the Arizona winter brought cooler temperatures and golden sunlight, I sat on Gran's back porch with a beer and looked out at the property. The canal behind the house burbled quietly, the same sound I'd fallen asleep to during those childhood summers. The garden was full of late-season vegetables, and tomorrow was the community harvest day I'd organized. My phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. Saw the article about the garden dedication. Gran is smiling down on you. So proud. The article she referenced was a feature in the Gilbert Sun News about Dorothy's garden and the fraud case that had preceded it. The reporter, a young woman named Elena Santos, had done a thorough job telling Gran's story and how the community had come together after the scandal. I texted back. Couldn't have done it without her example. She taught me to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, my mom replied. The next morning, over 30 people showed up for the harvest. We picked bushels of tomatoes, peppers, and squash, dividing them among everyone who'd contributed. The kids ran through the rows, laughing and playing, while the adults talked and worked. Someone brought lemonade. Mrs. Chen brought homemade dumplings. Frank Delgado set up a grill and started cooking vegetables on the spot. It felt like what a community should be. People coming together, helping each other, respecting boundaries and property rights while still being generous. Not because an HOA mandated it or threatened fines, but because it was the right thing to do. Ruth Palmer pulled me aside at one point. I've been meaning to tell you, we've completely overhauled the HOA's procedures. New bylaws, new financial controls, mandatory transparency in all votes. What happened with Barbara can never happen again. That's good to hear. We also wanted you to know that several members have filed a civil suit against Barbara and her lawyer, Derek Hoffman. They're arguing that Hoffman should have known the deed was fraudulent and advised against the playground project. Will that go anywhere? Maybe. Depends on what Hoffman knew and when he knew it. But either way, people are taking this seriously. We're not going to be passive anymore. As the afternoon stretched into evening and people started packing up their harvests, I found myself standing alone in the center of the garden. The rosemary bush had grown thick and fragrant, and the plaque gleamed in the setting sun. I thought about Gran's letter, the one where she'd asked me to be strong and not let them take the land. I'd done that. I'd fought the fight she couldn't finish, and I'd won. But more than that, I'd created something positive from the ashes of a crime. I turned anger and violation into growth and community. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Tom Patterson. Saw the news article. Well done, James. Your grandmother would be very proud, I replied. Thank you for everything. Couldn't have done this without you. That's what lawyers are for. Well, the good ones anyway. Enjoy your garden. As the stars started to appear in the darkening sky, I locked up Gran's house, now my house, and drove home feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. The battle was over. The land was protected. Justice had been served. But more importantly, I'd learned something Gran had always tried to teach me. That standing up for what's right isn't just about winning or losing. It's about principles, about integrity, about refusing to let bullies and thieves and frauds get away with it simply because fighting back is hard. The corner lot would remain Dorothy's garden, a living memorial to a stubborn old woman who wouldn't be pushed around, and a reminder that sometimes one person really can make a difference. You just have to be willing to stand your ground, dig in, and fight for what's yours. The HOA had tried to take what didn't belong to them. They'd forged documents, lied to the community, and violated my grandmother's memory, and they'd paid the price for it. Barbara Winters was in prison. The HOA's reputation was in tatters. And the land, the precious quarter-acre that Gran had protected for decades, was safe. In the end, that's what mattered. Not revenge, not money, not even the satisfaction of seeing Barbara arrested, though I wouldn't lie and say that hadn't felt good. What mattered was that I'd kept my promise to Gran. I'd protected what was hers, what was now mine, and I'd made sure that her stand against the HOA hadn't been in vain. As I pulled into my driveway, I looked back toward the corner where Dorothy's garden sat under the stars. Tomorrow, more neighbors would stop by to water and weed. Next month, we'd plant winter vegetables. In the spring, there'd be flowers and herbs and maybe some berry bushes if we could get the irrigation right. And through it all, Gran's memory would live on, not in some corporate playground built on stolen land, but in soil and sunlight and the honest work of people who cared about more than just rules and regulations and property values. That was her real legacy. Not the house, not the land itself, but the lesson she'd taught about standing firm in the face of pressure, about knowing your rights and defending them, about refusing to be bullied or tricked or intimidated. I'd carry that lesson for the rest of my life. And someday, when I had kids of my own, I'd bring them to Dorothy's garden and tell them about their great-grandmother, the woman who said no to an HOA and meant it, the woman who taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to let the bastards win. The house lights glowed warm and welcoming as I went inside, Gran's spirit somehow still present in every corner, every creaking floorboard, every sun-faded photograph on the wall. She was gone, but she wasn't forgotten. And her land, her precious corner lot, would remain exactly what she'd always wanted it to be. Free, open, and hers, mine now. But hers in spirit, always and forever.